Hi, I'm Tim Van Milligan. I'm going to show you your first simulation using Roxim Pro. Roxim Pro is a lot like Roxim. Let me bring up my screen here. So here is Roxim Pro, and you'll see that it looks a lot like Roxim. The difference is in the simulation. So if you want more design features than Roxim has, or more import-export capabilities, you're going to be disappointed because that's not the purpose of Roxim Pro. It is to run 6 degrees of freedom simulations, which is, Roxim is just a 3-degree simulator. This is 6 degrees, and we'll show you what that means when we run the simulation. If you are new to Roxim and Roxim Pro and you've never designed a rocket before, what I would recommend is that you go to our website and see our tutorials. They're located here under the How To and Guides menu. Click on that, then come down here to Software, and then come over here to Roxim Video Tutorials. And there's also Roxim Pro video tutorials. Now these are our old videos that we're in the process of updating, but the information is still good. It's just the screens look a little bit different because we've updated the graphics in Roxim. So go here to the Roxim video tutorials, and this is where you'll learn to design rockets. So let me go back to Roxim. And we want to load a design. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm looking in the Dynastar folder, and your designs are stored inside the application folder. There's a folder called Designs, and then inside of that are other manufacturers that you can look at. And I'm looking here at the Dynastar kit, and I'm looking for a 2-stage rocket. So I'm going to open this. This is the Aerodactyl. And on your the screen down here, you can scroll just like you can to zoom in and out, and you can click and drag and rotate it around any direction you want. But that's not where the differences are. The differences are in the simulation. So we're going to go up here to Prepare for Launch. Click on that, and you can see we have 2-stage rockets. So this is our sustainer right here, and this one is highlighted, so you can see that this tube right here is highlighted. And then here is our booster stage. So let's load some motors in here real quick. So I'm going to choose engine. I'll just choose an F15. And I'm going to select, this is my sustainer, so I'm going to use the longest delay possible. And then I'll click OK. And so you can see that it's loaded there. I'm going to load the same motor into the booster stage and just choose Load All. So it's also an F15-8, but we want to make the booster stage a 0-second delay. So we'll just select that. Now this is where we're going to start seeing some differences. So under flight events, we have here a new flight event called staging that's not in Roxim. And this allows us to control when staging occurs. In Roxim, the delay right here controls when staging occurs. But in Roxim Pro, you can modify that with a one of these factors, you know, like a time from liftoff, never staging, stage at a specific altitude. So you have all those criteria. I'm just going to choose maximum ejection delay since I have a 0-second delay. And then we have a parachute, and I'm going to say deploy that one at maximum ejection delay also. Now when you get into dual deployment, this is going to be different on setting up when your parachute is deployed. So go and watch that video in the Roxim Pro tutorials on how to do dual deployment, because it is specifically different from Roxim. And this is going to be the place where there is the most confusion. Under starting state, we have some new controls here because we're controlling the rocket more here. So we have the launch guide length, which is typical. We have the a launch angle from vertical, which is here. So you can grab this and I can launch it at any angle. What's new here is also launch guide azimuth angle. And consider this like a compass. So north is straight up, and that will be 0 degrees. 90 is on the right side, which is east. Here is south at 180, and west It's coming off to the left side here, and this is 270 degrees. So if I wanted to launch towards the west, I could just go like this, get over, and it shows it's minus 90, but you could also type in 270. And I'm hitting the tab key on the keyboard, and that's going to bump it all the way up to 90 degrees. It should be 90 degrees. What happened there? Minus 90. So I'm going straight west. You can also give it a launch guide type. Right now this is a static launch rod fixed to the earth, but you can also have it as drifts with wind. So the rocket has a horizontal velocity as it's going across the earth, like it's in a hot air balloon. If you were on an airplane and you wanted to launch it horizontally, you'd take your launch guide angle here and then set it to like 90 degrees. And so now I'm horizontal, and any velocity that takes off. But you'd also have a starting velocity if you were in an airplane down here. So if your airplane was going, 200 miles per hour, and now I'm launching flat horizontally, but to the west. So my airplane is going to the west. You can also give it a starting roll rate as this rocket's taking off, and you can play around with that. That's a lot of fun too. I just want to run a quick simulation here. Simulation controls, just leave this as default for right now. There's not a lot of need to change that. Launch conditions is right here. This is also a little bit different because we not only have an altitude of where we're launching from and a temperature and a barometric pressure, but we also have a latitude and longitude. So where on the Earth you are launching from becomes important. And if you don't know your latitude and longitude and your site's elevation, and that's this altitude right here, you will need to get that from somewhere. I would recommend Google Earth. You can get your latitude, longitude, and your altitude. So this altitude right here is above sea level. And your landing zone altitude is also above sea level. I usually set them at the same because it's really hard to predict what your landing zone altitude is unless you're launching from the top of a tall mountain. And everything is definitely going to be lower than your launch altitude. Another thing that's different is the wind table. In Roxim Pro, you have up to 24 different winds. You can have different wind layers, and each wind layer is going at a different azimuth direction. And so you would set them, and you'll notice that this altitude is above sea level. So this is not above ground level, this is above sea level. So here in Colorado, our launch altitude is about 4,500 feet above sea level. And if I set it here at 0, this is 4,500 feet below my launch altitude. So you have to remember that. So typically when I want just a constant wind blowing across the field, I'll set the 0, a wind speed at sea level, and then pick a really high altitude. Here I got 20,000 feet. You could make it even higher, 50,000 feet if you want. Your rocket's never going to get that high. This is just a model rocket, but it's going at the same. So this is coming out of the west at 270, going at 8 miles an hour across the field. So at all altitudes from not only sea level, but our launch altitude all the way up to 50,000 feet above sea level is an 8 mile an hour wind. Over here, our last tab is called uncertainties. On your first simulation, set this at 0. So make sure that this number is 0 right here. And as you get into the tutorials, you will find out what that uncertainties does. But for right now, let's turn it off. So now our launch is set up, and now this is the coolest part of Roxim Pro is the flight profile. So instead of clicking launch, click the flight profile. It does the same thing, but now we're going to go into a 3D environment. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it's going to run the simulation. Oop, I never left the pad. If you get that booster one, no information available. Just ignore it. I know exactly what I did. I can look at it in the flight visualizer. I'm still launching horizontal, so of course if I look over here, we never left the pad because as soon as we launch, we're hitting the ground. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And to do that, you have to hit up here in the top left-hand corner, the X box, to close that window. Now I'm going to go reset up my simulation and do it right this time. Go back to my starting state. Okay, I want to go straight up this time. I'm still going to the west. I'm going to take my starting velocity. I'm going to turn that back down to 0. Hit tab and click flight profile again. Okay, so this time it ran a simulation. I could see by the numbers going off. And if I want to peek at it, I can kind of move off here to the side. I can see over here we went 2,396 feet. But here is the flight visualizer. And this screen, you can adjust the size just like you can in any Roxim window. Here's the rocket sitting on the launch pad. And it picks the size of the pad based on the diameter of the rocket. So this is kind of a mid-power sized rocket. It's 2.6 inches in diameter, so it chose a mid-power pad for us. Down here we have what's called the mini view. And it's basically, right now, the mini view always keeps its eye on the rocket. In the main view, we can adjust. And I have some controls down here. And I'm going to zoom out by hitting on the minus button. You can also use your scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom out. And I can see here, and I can also click and drag around so I can move my launch pad around. You can take this dial indicator and you can rotate it around. I can look at it from any view except for underneath. So we're here. This is our launch site here in Pueblo, Colorado. This actual aerial image was taken on a day of a launch, which was very coincidental and very appropriate. This green triangle right here is actually a cone, and we call that the weathercocking cone. And you can see as you rotate it around, it still stays in a cone. And this kind of gives us an indication of a safe flight. We want our apogee point to stay within this cone, because that means the rocket's going more up than sideways. People always ask how much weathercocking is too much weathercocking. And the weathercocking cone will tell us if it stays within that cone, just the apogee point. Once it hits apogee, it can go out, but we want the apogee right in that inside of this cone somewhere. So right here at the bottom, if you kind of get lost, and if you lose your rocket, there's some keys over here, some buttons, and there's a home button. If you click the home button, it'll take you back home to the rocket sitting on the launch pad. And I'm going to zoom out again using the buttons this time. And then when I rotate around, the rocket should stay within the screen. We have different views over here on these buttons, but let me quickly run this simulation. So while I'm zoomed out, the rocket is hard to see, but I can see more of the trajectory as it's going up. But the mini view always keeps the same camera position. So we'll be able to see the rocket, what it's doing, while we're looking at the trajectory at the same time. And to run the simulation, I can see this one's going to run 139 seconds. You hit the button over here to kind of start it. And the rocket is taking off. This green line is the trajectory of the rocket. You can see in the mini view, which just went away, was the fire. And I have smoke turned off, so I'll have to turn that back on to show you what it looks like. And at this point, the parachute has opened up. And if I zoom back in, I can see the rocket is now under the parachute coming down to the ground. You can pause the simulation. You can take your time slider right here and scroll backwards and forwards in time. Let me go down to the end as the rocket gets back down to the ground, and then zoom out to kind of get a better overall view of what the trajectory looked like. You can see here is the launch point way over here. So the green line is always the sustainer. This red line along the ground is our ground track. This yellow one is our booster stage, and it's falling down, and it tracks its recovery location as well. So that gives you kind of a quick overview of running a simulation. Let me go through some of the buttons up here. So these are your preferences up here. So the mini view right here can be turned on and off with the bottom button. So that toggles your mini view on and off. So if I click it again, it will come back. This right here is a camera controller, and you have 4 different camera views. The one that we've been watching right here was the first one, and this one always keeps the rocket in the middle of the screen. So imagine drawing diagonal lines from your corners, and the rocket will always stay in the middle until you stop it and move it around. So if I ran the simulation again, it's going to jump, and it's going to put the rocket right always in the middle. So let's do that real quick and show you what that does. So it jumps, so the rocket's in the middle, and it always stays in the middle, and it moves the scene around the rocket. So your rocket's always in the middle of the screen. But then we lose the trajectory of the rocket and the ground and everything like that. So that's where the second button comes along, and this is our trajectory view. So if I click on the trajectory view, now the camera is fixed in one position only, and then the rocket will drift in and out of the center of the screen. So as you can see, the rocket is right here, and it's drifting down here to the bottom left, and it eventually will go off the screen. But I can also zoom on this one. I'm zooming out to get a better view of what's going on. So I'm going back a little bit, and then you can also spin around at any angle to get that view that you want to see. And then I can get an entire trajectory view. So usually what I do is I'll run it all the way to the end and then zoom in, keeping everything in the screen the way I want to see it. And then I'll rerun the simulation again. So here's the rocket taking off. You can see it. That green line is following the rocket as it's going upwards. And you can see it's picking up speed. It's going fast. Now it's starting to slow down, and it will eventually pop out its parachute. And you can see the booster stage is also doing something here. You can kind of tell that the booster stage, it was designed to tumble, but it was actually gliding a little bit because it was kind of doing this little swoopy maneuver. So I'm going to stop the animation and show you some of the other buttons. So up here, this is our flight data. So as the rocket's taking off, just like you had in Roxim, you have live flight data that you can see. So you can see its current coordinates, you can see its altitude above sea level, you can see its absolute velocity and relative velocity. The difference is the absolute velocity includes the spinning of the Earth. So even though the rocket's sitting on the ground, not moving at all, it has an absolute velocity because the Earth is rotating. So you have that centrifugal force spinning it around. But so typically you'll look at your relative velocity, and that's your relative to the launch position. So that's your flight data. And then up here is your preferences. And this is the one you'll probably use the most often. So you have your flight screen, which is what we're seeing right here. You can display the apogee point. So let me run the simulation here to the apogee point. So here's our apogee point. And it's color coded. So if it's a green dot, that means it's within the cone, the weathercocking cone. If it's a red dot, it means it's outside of the cone. So that gives you a quick indication. And you can toggle that on and off. You see I'll turn it back on and then turn it off. Our weathercocking cone can also be turned on and off, and you can also change the color here. So here's turned off. So launch pad elevation is, if you look at the rocket as it's sitting on the pad, let me zoom in here, go to the, and then zoom in. Sometimes your rocket appears to be suspended above the air a little bit, just like this one right here. So basically the map that this is based on isn't quite correct, and you can adjust it to make your rocket appear to be sitting on the pad by using this right here. And you can see there's a fine control on it to make it go to, okay, so here I'm going into the ground, so I've gone too far. So if you want it to sit on the ground exactly, this is where you would change that. And it's launch site dependent. So for this particular launch site, this is what I'd use. But if I was at a different launch site, I might need to tweak it. The trajectory path, as we mentioned before, is green. So I can change that color here. I can make it blue if I want. I find that green color is easiest to see, so I just leave it as green. You can also have the trajectory path. Right now, it's by default, it trails the rocket. So let me zoom out, and so here's the rocket, and the path trails the rocket. And if I untoggle that, so now we can see the entire trajectory, but the rocket is still right there. So for most flights, you want to leave this turned on because otherwise it's kind of confusing, but you can see the entire trajectory. You can also toggle on and off interval points. So every second in the flight, you'll get a dot. So let me zoom out and get this better. So here we're already 2 seconds, almost 3 seconds into the flight. You can see down here 2.63 seconds. So if I go to 3 seconds, I'll get another dot right there at the top of the screen. Oops, something went away. I lost my maps. I think I lost my internet connection. Let me see what happens when I hit play again. Nope. Yeah, I think I lost my internet connection. That's what would happen if you lose internet connection, because the maps are provided real time through the internet. Some of the other ones over here, you can also change the trajectory path for the booster stages. Like in Roxim, you can display the force vectors, and then finally you can display smoke. You can turn your smoke on and off. You can have your smoke at different colors, your flame at different colors. So if you have a red line, you can make a red flame. If you have a Mojave green, you can make a green flame. You can have different color for tracking smoke versus thrust smoke, and then how long the smoke actually sticks around in the simulation. Let's see if I can rerun a new simulation here. Let's run this, and let's change the starting state a little bit. So before we were almost straight up. So let's launch it this way and go a little bit more to the northwest and do flight profile. Let's hope that my internet connection has coming back up. Okay, it looks like we do. Okay, so let me go back here. Let's get this rocket in the air a little bit. So now we angled it, and you can see our smoke, or our flame down here. Let me turn on the smoke. So here's thrust smoke, and you'll see the thrust smoke. Let me moving this around on you too fast. So we have the smoke coming off of the rocket. You can see there's two distinct smokes right here, and I'm assuming that this is where the booster stage burned out and where our sustainer started burning. And then there's tracking smoke, which is blue. So there was a little bit of blue right there. And if I back this off a little bit and get a little bit more of the trajectory. Okay, so here is, so now we're into blue smoke. So now we know where rocket is coasting. And then the smoke will go away after 8 seconds. So, oh, I'm in the keep the rocket centered view, which is why my rocket disappeared on me. Okay, so there we go. So we got blue smoke, and after 8 seconds, that smoke will disappear, just like it does in real life. And this time, our booster stage took a different path, which is kind of cool. Let me close their preferences. If you look at the ground track, it kind of circled around a little bit. It was kind of gliding again. And you can also see we also have a dot here. So the red dot tells us we're outside of the cone. And I'm pretty sure our green one, or on the green trajectory, will also be the same. Another red dot. We're way outside of the weathercocking cone. So here's our weathercocking cone right here. So we're way outside of it. So Just wanted to give you a quick overview of Roxim, Roxim Pro, and how you run a quick simulation and some of the user preferences. Don't be afraid to explore that. It's a lot of fun. As you can see, just changing little things makes a big difference in the flight of your rocket. So thank you again for watching this video and for your interest in Roxim Pro. I'm sure you're going to love it. If you have any questions, just come to the Apogee website and drop us a note, and we'll be happy to help you out. So thank you.